This is an interesting subject matter, and from the Vedic perspective, I would like to speak a little bit about the history of all the different religious leaders of the past and how they are all actually, rather than viewing them all as separate, and as it's become very common in America right now, that every different religious faction and religious sect, even within Christianity, is fighting with the other one. Everyone is trying to do one-upsmanship. I'd like to explain a little bit about the history of religion and the unity of purpose of all the great religious masters according to time, place, and circumstance. So the Vedic perspective is that in the 5,000 years ago, the Battle of Kurukshetra occurred, in which the Pandavas came out victorious. And at that time, different tribes or different segments of the population left India because they didn't want to live in the Vedic culture. They had some different ideas, and one of these tribes that left was the Abrahamic line, or the line of Abraham. And eventually this line moved through the Middle East and became to know as the Jewish faith. But actually, what is lesser known and is spoken about in the Bible, that we can even see in the name Abraham, that the word practically spells Brahmana, and that he moved from the middle, where the story picks up with Abraham. It is exactly at the time of after the Battle of Kurukshetra, approximately 5,000 years ago. This is, if you examine the Jewish calendar, when the Jewish calendar begins. We have his name so closely linked to Brahmana, and he is starting in the eastern regions and moving to the west. And if we just take the story back a little bit further, either him or his descendants actually had come from India just after the Battle of Kurukshetra. So what is lesser known about Abraham, that what is known is that his son Isaac led to the line of Judah, or the Jewish people, but his other son, Isaac, was the founder of the Muslim religion. So actually, if you take it back far enough, the Jews and the Muslims are brothers. That Ishmael was the founder of the Muslim religion, and that Isaac was the founder of the Jewish religion. Now, the story of Abraham is that, with his wife Sarah, he had Isaac, and then he wanted to have another son, but actually he wanted to have a son with his wife Sarah for a very long time, and then they were both getting very, very old, and it started to seem doubtful that he was ever going to conceive a child with his wife Sarah. So he was allowed to mate with the maidservant, and the son that was born from that was Ishmael. And then, even though in her old age, miraculously, after the son Ishmael was born through the maidservant, that Sarah does get pregnant, even though she's very old, that Abraham has already had a son through the maidservant, Ishmael. So the son that comes from his wife, Sarah, is Isaac. So this creates enmity between the two parties, and ultimately Ishmael is kicked out from the tribe. So this is where the original division between the Jewish and the Muslim comes in, is that the one son born of the wife later, Isaac, was kept within the tribe of the Judah, and the Ishmael, Abraham's original son, was kicked out. So if you trace it back far enough, actually the Jews and the Muslims are brothers, but this original enmity has become the divide between them for so many years. So we have the Jewish line and the Islamic line. So within the Jewish line, Jesus Christ appears after some time, and basically his whole purpose is to reform the Jewish religion. As we know, he was very much against the Pharisees and the Sadducees and all the different elements of the Jewish religion that had become corrupted over time. So, and it was not only to reform the Jewish religion, but to give an example for all time, to avoid the hypocrites and the elements that take over religions, turn them into institutions of corruption, and that we have to stick with the original teachings of the great masters of ancient knowledge. So we have the Abrahamic line coming from India, then Jesus coming in as a reform to that. And then if we take the line coming from Ishmael, the Islamic line, then eventually we get to Muhammad, whose basic purpose was the same as Jesus, that the Islamic line had become corrupted, that there was a great amount of demigod worship, that the original purpose and meaning of the great masters was lost, and he came to reform that. And also there's a lot of commonality between the Christian religion and the Muslim religion, in that the Muslims also believe Jesus Christ was a great prophet. And actually Muhammad's point was to reform again after Jesus came. Jesus came about 2,000 years ago. Then Muhammad came later on to reform both the Islamic and Christian traditions, because again they had become wayward. So he was actually also a Christian reformer and trying to reform the people of Christ at the time. Then if we look at the Vedic line that remained within India, we have, after the Battle of Kurukshetra, slowly but surely the Vedic line becomes degraded. And in the past, the whole purpose of the animal sacrifice was that the animal would come out with a rejuvenated life and a rejuvenated body, because the Brahmanas were so expert through the chanting of Vedic mantras that they can rejuvenate the life of an animal. So in the past, in the ancient past, it was not that animal sacrifice was there to slaughter animals. It was to test the Vedic mantras to make sure the priests still had their potency, and the animal would come out with a new rejuvenated body. But this had become degraded after the Battle of Kurukshetra with the influence of the age of Kali as it progressed from 5,000 years ago. So then Lord Buddha appeared, who was actually a hidden incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And his main purpose within India, Lord Buddha appeared in India, his main purpose was to stop the slaughter of the cow and the other animals that were going on in the name of Vedic sacrifice. So therefore, Lord Buddha rejected the Vedas. He said that if this is part of your Vedas, to slaughter these animals, which it became basically a slaughterhouse, and people were taking out the remnants of this so-called sacrifice, was some kind of holy remnants that they could, so meat eating was starting to become prevalent, that in the name of religion, animals are being slaughtered right and left. And this was not the original meaning of the Vedic performance of sacrifice. It was that the mantras were being tested to make sure that the animal would come out with a new rejuvenated body. So this had all become corrupted and fallen down as the age and influence of the age of Kali had progressed. So Lord Buddha's primary main purpose was ahimsa, and the rejection of all the Vedas to stop the animal slaughter, and especially to stop the slaughter of the cow and the bull. And also, the people, due to this process, the people had become very atheistic. So Lord Buddha appealed to them that, not speaking of a Supreme Personality of Godhead or a spiritual kingdom, but rather just nirvana and the dissolution of the material elements. But secretly, he was the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So by following him, they were actually following Godhead, but it was in a way that could be accepted by the people of the day, because they would not overtly do that anymore, because through the process of corrupted sacrifice and taking the remnants of that corrupted sacrifice, everyone's mind had been turned towards atheism. So it was actually a transcendental trick of the Supreme Lord. And also, I visited Japan, and when you go to the Buddhist temples there's usually a huge statue of Buddha. And the people within the temple are actually very devoted to Buddha. They bring him different rice cakes and different offerings throughout the days. They burn incense for his pleasure. So actually, even though Buddhism is supposed to be very impersonalistic, and that there is no spiritual world, no personal relationship with the Creator, but actually, if you go to Buddhist temples, it's not that way at all. It's very personal. So this is an indication of how Buddha, as a hidden incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, while overtly teaching atheism and the cessation of matter as the ultimate goal, and nirvana as a place to reside, where kind of a impersonalistic white light, that actually it was covertly personalism, and to stop the sacrifice of animals. Then if we follow the Vedic line a little further, we come to Sankaracharya, and his purpose in the meaning of the reform of the great masters was that he reinstated the Vedas as a system of spiritual knowledge and for the masses, but it was done in a way that the people could accept at the time, which was impersonalism, that ultimately God was not personal, but that he was impersonal. So this was just a step, the step from where Buddha had rejected the Vedas in order to stop the animal sacrifice, in order to appeal to the people who had become atheistic throughout India and the Far East and the Near East, that this system of Lord Buddha was actually the prevalent. Lord Buddha was very popular during his time, but when he passed from this world, Buddhism fell into disrepair for 500 years, and it was with the advent of Emperor Ashoka of India, who instated Buddhism as the religion, the official religion of the state of India. Then Buddhism was the main religion of India for 1,000 years after that. So Buddha came. His movement was very popular during his time. After he passed, the Buddhist movement fell into disrepair for 500 years and was neglected, and hardly anyone was understanding it. Then Emperor Ashoka made it after he became involved in Buddhism, made it the official religion of India. And 500 years after the death of Buddha, Buddhism became the prominent religion of India for 1,000 years. So Buddha was about 2,500 years ago. That would put the advent and the rise of Buddhism 500 years ago at pretty much the same time as Jesus Christ, or that Buddhism would be on the rise in India, and pretty much at the same time that Jesus Christ would be reforming the Jewish religion in the Middle East. Then it was the main religion of India for 1,000 years, and that's when Sankaracharya comes along in the next step in the program and the plan of the reform of religion, and to reinstate the Vedas, but in an impersonalistic way, that God is not a person, rather he is a divine force. Then we come to the next step in the Vedic line of reform, which is finally hitting at the ultimate resolution, which is the advent of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu within India 500 years ago. And he taught, which was the original essence teachings of the Bhagavad Gita 5,000 years ago, which was spoken on the battlefield of Kurukshetra just before the battle, which after that battle ultimately led to the tribes of Abraham leaving India, which split off into the Jewish and Islamic lines, later on to be reformed by Jesus and Muhammad. That the original teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna speaks of all the different types of yoga, the Hatha Yoga, the Dhanjaya Yoga, the Buddhi Yoga, but the highest of all yogas is Bhakti Yoga, or loving devotional service, as part and parcel to the Supreme Godhead, the feminine and male divine couple, Radha Krishna, Radha Madhava. But it took a long time for all these reforms to take place. And finally then, 1,000 years after Lord Buddha, then this is when Sankaracharya comes, and then 500 years ago, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu comes to reveal the essence of all the teachings of all the great ancient wisdom systems, which is Bhakti Yoga, or loving devotional service in transcendental mellows of ecstasy and bliss, to ultimately return back home, back to Godhead, to participate in our natural constitutional position as a person, in a personal relationship with the Supreme Godhead in eternity, bliss, and knowledge. So this is the Vedic line of reform. Buddha completely rejecting the Vedas, Sankaracharya reinstating the Vedas, then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu 500 years ago revealing the actual true purpose and purport of the Vedas, which is Bhakti Yoga, or loving devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead.